Garrett Cole always said the sound of a creek at sunrise could calm a man down faster than whiskey, and most mornings, standing barefoot in my kitchen with a hot cup of coffee and sawdust still stuck to my socks from the night before, I believed him. But that Tuesday morning 6 years ago, the only thing I felt was confusion, because taped to my front door was a certified legal notice demanding $43,000 in HOA fines for a neighborhood I had never even joined. I remember standing there in silence, coffee cooling in my hand while my 16-year-old daughter Lily leaned over my shoulder reading the paperwork out loud like maybe hearing it twice would magically make it less insane. Then I looked across the creek and saw her. Vanessa Holloway, standing on her perfectly trimmed lawn in a cream-colored sweater set, arms folded, watching my reaction like she was waiting for fireworks. And I swear to God, that woman smiled when she saw me reading it. Now before I tell you how this suburban dictator nearly destroyed my business, my reputation, and honestly my sanity for a while, I gotta ask y'all something. Have you ever met somebody who got a tiny little taste of power and suddenly acted like they were running a third world country? Because that's exactly what happened here. And trust me, this story gets way crazier than a fake HOA lawsuit. My name's Garrett Cole, I'm 42 years old, former Army combat engineer, divorced, father of one stubborn teenage girl who inherited my sarcasm and her mother's attitude, and 12 years ago I bought what I thought was the perfect little piece of Tennessee peace and quiet. The house sat on 2 acres outside a development called Briar Glen Estates, tucked beside a shallow creek lined with oak trees and river stone. Technically my property used to belong to an old family farm before developers chopped the land up into manicured suburban lots with matching mailboxes and neighborhood rules about acceptable curtain colors, but my section never got included in the HOA. That mattered more than I realized at the time. See, after Afghanistan, I wanted distance from people. Not isolation exactly, just room to breathe. I built a workshop behind the house where I restored old motorcycles and picked up electrical contract work when bills got tight. Lily grew up catching frogs in the creek and painting little signs for my garage. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Then Vanessa Holloway moved into Briar Glen. Vanessa was the kind of woman who somehow looked overdressed even walking her dog. Blonde hair always perfect, expensive jewelry even at 7 in the morning, drove a white Range Rover that had probably never touched dirt in its life. Her husband Richard sat on the county zoning board, which she mentioned so often you'd think he was governor instead of a middle-aged guy with cholesterol problems and boat shoes. At first it was little things. She complained about the sound of my power tools during the daytime, by the way, completely legal. Then she started taking pictures of my property from across the creek. One afternoon Lily walked inside and said, "Dad, creepy Barbie's out there with binoculars again." I laughed the first few times because honestly it seemed too ridiculous to take seriously. But Vanessa wasn't joking. One Saturday morning she marched straight onto my property holding a clipboard against her chest like she was carrying nuclear codes. "Your workshop violates community aesthetic standards," she announced before even saying hello. I looked around slowly, at my workshop, my truck, my dog sleeping beside the porch, then back at her. "Ma'am," I said, "this property ain't in your neighborhood." Her smile tightened so fast it almost looked painful. "That's where you're mistaken." Now, I should have shut the conversation down harder right there, but I made the mistake most normal people make with crazy folks. I assumed logic would eventually kick in. Instead, things escalated fast. Vanessa started filing complaints with county code enforcement every other week. Noise violations, landscaping violations, illegal business activity. One inspector finally pulled me aside after his third visit and muttered, "Buddy, whoever keeps calling this in really hates you." Then came Lily's birthday barbecue. Nothing wild, just burgers, music, a few kids from school laughing around a bonfire near the creek. Around 9:32 sheriff deputies rolled up because somebody reported dangerous disturbances and possible underage drinking. One deputy walked over holding a paper plate with potato salad on it and whispered, "This might be the calmest party we've ever responded to." Even they looked embarrassed. The next morning I found the first violation notice tucked under my windshield wiper. $500 for unauthorized exterior structures. $500 more for gravel driveway modifications. Another for visual disruption to neighborhood standards. Lily stared at the paper and just blinked slowly. "Dad," she said, "can somebody legally be this annoying?" And standing there beside my truck while morning fog rolled off the creek, I remember looking toward Vanessa's giant brick house across the water and thinking something that would end up changing both our lives forever. This woman doesn't want compliance, she wants control. And unfortunately for her, she had just picked a fight with a man who spent most of his 20s building bridges in war zones while people shot at him. The first real sign Vanessa Holloway was willing to burn down other people's lives just to feel important came 3 days after Lily's birthday party, when a sheriff's deputy handed me an official lawsuit packet thick enough to stop a bullet. I remember the weight of it in my hands more than anything else. Heavy paper, expensive legal formatting, stamped signatures everywhere. The kind of documents designed to make regular people panic before they even finish reading the first paragraph. Lily was sitting cross-legged on the couch doing homework when I walked inside carrying the envelope, and the second she saw my face, her pencil stopped moving. "What now?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the first page while my coffee went cold beside me. Briar Glen Homeowners Association versus Garrett Cole. The lawsuit claimed I owed over $43,000 in accumulated fines, property damage assessments, legal fees, and mandatory compliance penalties, and buried halfway through page 4 was the sentence that almost made me laugh out loud from pure disbelief. By occupying property adjacent to Briar Glen Estates for an extended period of time, the defendant has implicitly accepted the authority and governance of the Homeowners Association. I actually blinked twice reading that sentence. Because even without a law degree, I knew that sounded like something invented by a woman who drank Chardonnay while watching courtroom dramas on cable television. Lily leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Wait, they think living near them means you joined them?" "Apparently," I muttered. "That's like saying if you park beside a Ferrari long enough, eventually you own it." But Vanessa wasn't bluffing anymore. This had moved beyond annoying neighbor territory. This was war. The next morning I drove into Knoxville and met with an attorney named Rachel Mercer, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s who had the kind of dry humor you only develop after 30 years of dealing with human stupidity professionally. Her office smelled like old books and peppermint tea, and after reading Vanessa's lawsuit for about 6 minutes straight, Rachel leaned back in her chair and laughed so hard she actually had to take off her glasses. Mr. Cole, she said, wiping tears from her eyes, I don't normally say this early in a case, but your neighbor might actually be insane. Turns out Rachel specialized in property rights disputes and HOA abuse cases, which unfortunately are apparently very common in America now. She explained that some HOA presidents start believing they own entire zip codes after a few years of controlling mailbox paint colors and lawn heights. But what bothered her most wasn't the lawsuit itself, it was the confidence behind it. Vanessa genuinely believed she could bully me into submission. And according to Rachel, people like Vanessa usually only get that bold after succeeding before. So we started digging. County property records. Old zoning maps. Original subdivision filings. Environmental reports. And that's when things stopped being petty, and started becoming dangerous. A retired county clerk named Walter Jenkins met us in the records basement 2 days later. Tiny old guy, suspenders, smelled faintly like pipe tobacco and printer ink. He shuffled through dusty archive boxes while muttering to himself about crooked developers and rich idiots with too much free time. Then suddenly he froze. Well now, he murmured. That ain't right. He handed Rachel an original planning document from 2008 showing the Briar Glen subdivision boundary map, and my property wasn't included. Not by accident either. It had been intentionally excluded because the creek running between us sat inside a protected floodplain buffer zone. The county specifically prohibited HOA expansion across that land. Rachel stared at the paperwork for almost a full minute before slowly smiling. Garrett, she said quietly. Your neighbor's husband absolutely knew this. That's when the whole thing clicked into place. Richard Holloway, Vanessa's husband, sat on the county zoning board when Briar Glen got approved. Which meant both of them had known from day one my property legally could not belong to the HOA. They weren't confused. They were lying. Deliberately. And once Rachel smelled fraud, she went hunting for blood. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. 3 other families had mysteriously moved out of Briar Glen over the last 6 years after long legal disputes with Vanessa. One family drained their retirement savings fighting violation fines over a backyard shed. Another sold their house below market value after repeated harassment complaints. Every story sounded the same. Vanessa targeted working families she thought couldn't afford to fight back. Meanwhile, rich homeowners somehow got away with obvious violations without so much as a warning letter. One evening Mrs. Delgado, an older widow who lived inside Briar Glen, invited Lily and me over for dinner. Her house smelled like garlic bread and cinnamon candles, and halfway through dessert she leaned forward lowering her voice like somebody might be listening through the walls. That woman's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, she whispered. People are just scared of her. Then she disappeared into another room and came back holding a plastic grocery bag full of cassette tapes. I stared at her. Please tell me those are what I think they are. She nodded slowly. I started recording HOA meetings after Vanessa threatened to fine me because my grandson left his bicycle in the driveway overnight. Rachel nearly had a heart attack listening to those tapes the next day. Vanessa's voice came crackling through old speakers clear as daylight. People like Garrett Cole always fold eventually, she said during one recording. You bury them in paperwork long enough and they'll either comply or leave. Another tape captured Richard warning Vanessa privately that my property was legally excluded from the HOA. Her response made my stomach turn cold. Then we pressure him until he gives up voluntarily. Lily sat beside me during that recording, hugging her knees against her chest while anger slowly spread across her face. "They knew," she whispered. "The whole time, they knew." But Vanessa still wasn't done escalating. Because right around the same time we uncovered the tapes, somebody started sabotaging my business. Nails scattered across my driveway. Anonymous complaints filed against my contractor's license. Fake online reviews warning customers that I was under investigation for unsafe electrical work. My monthly income dropped almost 40% in 3 weeks. One morning I walked outside and found my workshop power line cut clean through like somebody had taken bolt cutters to it in the middle of the night. And standing there in the cold morning air staring at those dead wires hanging beside my garage, something shifted inside me. Up until then I'd been defending myself. Trying to survive. Trying to keep Lily safe and pay bills and outlast a crazy woman with too much time and too little empathy. But now I was angry. Real angry. Afghanistan taught me something important about bullies. If they think you'll keep retreating, they never stop advancing. And Vanessa Holloway had finally pushed far enough that I stopped worrying about peace. I started thinking about consequences. Because buried inside those cassette tapes and county records was enough evidence to destroy not only Vanessa's reputation, but her husband's career, the entire HOA board, and possibly every fraudulent fine they'd collected for nearly a decade. The problem was, once we pulled that trigger, there would be no going back. And deep down, I think Vanessa sensed it too. Because the next thing she did proved she was getting desperate, and desperate people make dangerous mistakes. Vanessa Holloway showed up to the county hearing dressed like she was running for Senate, cream blazer, pearl earrings, perfect makeup, carrying a leather binder thick enough to hide a body in. And honestly, watching her walk into that government building that morning, chin lifted high like she still controlled the room, I almost admired the commitment. Because by then the woman was standing on a collapsing bridge pretending not to hear the cracks underneath her feet. The county commission chamber was packed wall to wall. Homeowners from Briar Glen filled the seats. Local reporters lined the back wall holding cameras. Even people from neighboring subdivisions showed up after rumors spread online that the Briar Glen HOA might have been operating illegally for years. Lily sat beside me wearing my old army hoodie with her arms folded tight across her chest, trying to act calm even though I could feel nervous energy radiating off her like heat from asphalt. Rachel leaned over before things started and whispered, "Just remember, let Vanessa talk as much as possible. Narcissists always hang themselves eventually." God, she was right. Vanessa opened the hearing with a dramatic presentation about protecting community values and preserving neighborhood safety. She had enlarged photos of my workshop displayed on foam boards like she was presenting evidence in a murder trial. One picture showed my motorcycle lift beside a toolbox with yellow extension cords hanging nearby. You'd think I was manufacturing missiles back there instead of fixing Harleys and rewiring kitchens. This commercial activity, Vanessa announced loudly, has endangered property values and disrupted the peaceful character of Briar Glen Estates. Then she pointed directly at me in front of the entire room. Mr. Cole has repeatedly ignored lawful HOA directives while intimidating concerned residents. I actually laughed under my breath hearing that. Me, intimidating? I'm 6'3" with a beard and tattoos, sure, but I spend most weekends grilling burgers and helping old ladies fix ceiling fans. Meanwhile, this woman weaponized legal paperwork like a Bond villain with a Pinterest account. But then Rachel stood up. Calm. Slow. No theatrics at all. And the entire energy in that room changed. Before we continue discussing violations, she said, sliding a stack of documents onto the commissioner's desk, perhaps we should establish whether Briar Glen Homeowners Association legally possessed authority over Mr. Cole's property in the first place. Vanessa's expression twitched. Just slightly. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I was. Rachel walked the commission through the original county subdivision maps, the floodplain restrictions, the environmental buffer requirements, all the official records proving my property had been intentionally excluded from the HOA since the very beginning. Then she introduced the real bombshell. The forged incorporation signature. You could literally hear people shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the forensic handwriting analyst explained how the supposed signature from the previous property owner had been copied after the man had already died. One commissioner actually removed his glasses and rubbed both hands across his face like he suddenly regretted waking up that morning. Vanessa interrupted constantly. Objecting. Accusing. Talking over witnesses. At one point she stood up and shouted, "This is a coordinated attack against our neighborhood." Rachel didn't even flinch. She simply pressed play on one of Mrs. Delgado's cassette recordings. And suddenly Vanessa's own voice filled the chamber through old crackling speakers. People like Garrett Cole always fold eventually. Silence. Pure silence. Vanessa's face drained white so fast it honestly scared me a little. The tape kept playing. You bury them in paperwork long enough and they'll either comply or leave. Somebody in the audience whispered, "Holy hell," then came Richard's voice warning her my property wasn't legally inside the HOA. Followed by Vanessa replying coldly. Then we pressure him until he gives up voluntarily. The room exploded. People started talking over each other. Homeowners stood up yelling questions at the HOA board members sitting frozen near the front row. One older man shouted, "You've been finding us illegally for years?" Another woman burst into tears asking whether her family lost thousands over fraudulent violations. And right in the middle of all that chaos, Vanessa snapped. Completely. She lunged toward Rachel screaming that the recordings were fake, that everyone was conspiring against her family, that jealous people wanted to destroy Briar Glen because they couldn't stand successful women. Security officers moved in fast, but Vanessa kept shouting while they escorted her backward toward the exit. "You people have no idea what he's really like," she screamed, pointing at me wildly. "He manipulated all of you." Lily squeezed my arm hard enough to hurt while cameras flashed across the room like lightning. And standing there watching Vanessa Holloway unravel in public after terrorizing people for years, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Just deeply, bone-deep tired. Because the thing nobody tells you about fighting bullies is eventually you stop caring about winning. You just want peace back. The county commission voted unanimously before the hearing even ended. Briar Glen HOA's authority over my property was declared completely invalid. All fines against me were dismissed permanently. The case was referred for criminal fraud investigation along with possible civil restitution claims from homeowners inside the subdivision. And Richard Holloway, well, the county suspended him from the zoning board pending ethics review before sunset that same day. But the moment I'll remember for the rest of my life happened afterward outside the courthouse. Reporters crowded around while people argued in the parking lot and camera crews packed equipment into vans. Lily stood beside me holding a milkshake she'd begged for on the drive home, and suddenly Mrs. Delgado walked over carrying one of those old cassette tapes in her purse. She smiled at Lily first. "Your daddy did a brave thing," she said softly. Then she turned to me. "Most people let folks like Vanessa win because fighting back costs too much." I looked across the street then, toward the creek visible beyond the trees in the distance, sunlight bouncing off the water exactly the same way it had the morning this whole nightmare started. Same creek. Same house. Same quiet little workshop waiting for me at home. But somehow everything felt different now. Maybe because for the first time in almost 2 years, nobody was watching us anymore. 6 months later, Vanessa and Richard settled 3 separate civil lawsuits. Briar Glen homeowners dissolved the HOA completely and replaced it with a voluntary neighborhood council that mostly organizes cookouts and holiday decorations now. Richard lost his zoning position. Vanessa quietly sold the house and moved out of state after the local news replayed her courthouse meltdown for 3 straight weeks. As for me, business eventually recovered. Lily got accepted into college last spring. And every now and then we still sit beside the creek at sunset listening to frogs and crickets while she jokes about writing a book called HOA Lady from Hell. Honestly, maybe she should. But here's the part people argue about whenever I tell this story. Some folks think I should have accepted Vanessa's settlement offer early on and avoided destroying their lives publicly. Others think people like her only stop once somebody finally stands up and refuses to back down. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done? If somebody with money, connections, and power tried to slowly squeeze you out of your own home, would you fight back no matter how ugly it got? Or would you walk away just to protect your peace? Drop your answer in the comments because trust me, after everything that happened in Briar Glen, I'm still not sure there's an easy answer to that question.